Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Jess with So Many Creations. In this video, I'm going to walk you through my Explorer crossbody. This is a freebie and it actually started back in 2020, if you can believe it, in the Better Homes and Gardens Quilts and More. This was the spring 2020 issue. It was the first in my 4-part series called Pack Your Bags. So if you have this magazine, maybe you've already made the pattern, we're going to go through the things that I did here, but we're also going to kind of boost it up a little bit. It's still going to be beginner friendly. It's still a very simple bag, but because of size and space constraints and also requirements from the magazine, I had to do a few things differently than I would normally do if I was writing a pattern. So in the magazine version, which is this one right here, it is a removable strap, but it's not adjustable. Today, we're going to add a slide, just like this one, so you can make your handle adjustable. It's still removable. There is a zipper closure, which is exactly the way the magazine has it. And underneath here, I've also added some magnets just to help keep that closed. In the original pattern, that was skipped. So if you would like to skip that as well, you totally can. So we're going to take this pattern right here and we're going to bump it up just a little bit. Instead of doing it all out of cotton like I did back then, I'm going to do the outside in cork, and I'm actually going to do the lining in waterproof canvas. If you would like to use cotton or canvas or anything in the woven kind of area, if you want to use like a cotton canvas or just a quilter's cotton, anything like that, even a linen, you can absolutely do that. The only difference for you is that you're going to interface your pieces. And when we get into that, I'll show you which ones you want to interface. You're going to need 2 pieces for the outside and 2 for the lining, and then you'll just need to assemble your handle. It's actually a pretty simple bag. So if you need any of the supplies, or if you would prefer to print out the supply list, which has the cutting, you can go ahead and get it right here on my website. Otherwise, I'm going to go through all of the pieces with you, and actually I'm going to cut my pieces for you so you can watch how I cut. If you don't need that, you can skip right forward into the instruction part. And I'm going to have a separate screen that will also list your sizes. That way, it's whatever is easiest for you. You can download something from the website or you can get it all on this video. If you like videos like this, don't forget to hit subscribe, click the notification bell, and give it a thumbs up. All right, let's get into it. So before we get into our cutting, let's take a closer look at the bag. This is the kind of newer and updated version that we're going to be making in today's video. This one right here, which is from the magazine, is just a little bit more simplified. Now, the bag itself is absolutely simple and beginner friendly. This one just had to be simplified even a little bit more than I would normally do just because of the magazine. When you are having, when you have a pattern in a magazine, you have certain amounts of words and space that you're allowed to, and the magazine was very set on having something super beginner friendly. So we're going to keep it beginner friendly, but bump it up just a little bit. So the handle is kind of just one long handle. I have it knotted here because of how I had it displayed, but it's not an adjustable handle. It is removable, and we're going to do that as well, but it's just not adjustable. So in today's video, in this more updated version, I'm going to show you how to add a slide. We're still going to make our little tabs right here with the D-rings, still making it a removable handle because I think it's a little bit easier, and especially with something thin like this is a 1/2 inch finished. Sometimes I feel like they can wear out a little bit quicker because they're thinner, and maybe you want to make yours wider or have a couple different handle options. We have a zipper right here. This is a number 5 zipper. If you have a number 3 zipper, which is a little bit smaller than this, you can still use it. I'm pretty sure the original one, which this is kind of the second one. There was a cotton version that I no longer have. That one I'm fairly certain had a number 3 plastic zipper. There's a little handmade tag, which I'm not going to do today. I'm going to skip over that, but you can very easily add your own tag if you want to put something here or even down here. And while we're talking about this kind of area right here, this has been folded over for going on 4 years now, and it stays folded over really nicely. I did press it when it was done, and it's also just kind of sat this way, so it definitely still folds over. But I got a lot of questions over the years of people seeing this saying, couldn't you put some magnetic snaps back here just to kind of help it? And the answer is yes. And that's what we're also going to do in today's video. So you'll see I have my snaps. Those are totally optional. As you saw with the other sample, it's not a necessary piece of hardware. So if you are making this and don't have snaps, or you just aren't comfortable putting them in, you can totally skip them. The last thing I want to show you on this sample before we get into our supplies is the beautiful embroidery that I did right here. This is actually a design that I purchased from Embroidery Online, or OESD. This is from Tula Pink's Moonflower or Moonglow collection. I'm sorry if I'm saying the wrong one. I will try to put the information down here so you know exactly which one it is. But I just thought it was so beautiful. It was just the perfect size to put in the middle of the flap. So if you are going to do your own embroidery, just keep in mind that it's actually going on the back piece because of the way the bag folds towards the front. And it is going towards the top of that piece, but you're going to want to turn it. So the top of my bag is here, the top of my piece, but it's the bottom of my design. So you just kind of want to keep that in mind when you're going along and doing your embroidery because of the way it folds. So especially if you have something directional or a monogram or something like that, just make sure that you make sure to rotate your piece when you put it in your embroidery machine. And there's my snaps right there. So there is the finished bag. Inside of this one is some waterproof canvas, and that's what I'm going to make the sample out of today. And there's my slide. I used a really pretty purple thread. I like how that contrast looked. So I'm going to set this aside. We'll get into our supplies, and then we're going to move on and start cutting our pieces. So the basic supplies that I have grabbed for today are my clips. I always have those around when I'm making a bag. I am going to use some double stick tape. This is 1/8 inch. If you don't have this, you can just use clips or pins if you're using cotton. That is totally fine. I just find this to be a time saver when it comes to the zipper, and I'll show you when we get there. I have some marking tools, of course. I have a chalk pencil and I have a friction pen. Depends on where I'm marking. The cork that I used for that sample has a black backing, so I needed chalk. And the one that I'm using today, which is here, actually has a lighter backing, so I'll probably just use my friction pen. Of course, I have some scissors. I have my seam ripper and stiletto combo. This turning point right here is really great for finishing the bag. It's very small, but it's really great for getting into those small corners, especially after you make your darts. Speaking of darts, I have my little acrylic template right here. This is available on the website if you would like to purchase one, but you do not need to. For this pattern, I had mentioned before that you didn't have to download the supply list if you don't want to, and I goofed. You actually will need to download it in order to get your template. You could always leave the corners totally straight, or you could box them if you know how to do that. Totally up to you. I like adding the darts. I think it gives it a nice kind of rounded look, and it's not just so square, you know, and it gives it a little bit of depth. If I hadn't added those, it would be a very, very flat bag. Other than those tools, I have my hardware here. So I have gathered these pieces. Let me show you what you're going to need. I have a slide, I have 2 D-rings, and I have 2 swivel hooks. This is going to be for the handle and the tabs, and these are all 1/2 inch. I'm going to use the antique brass today. If you don't have that kind of hardware and you need to purchase it, you can also purchase the Charlotte hardware kit. Yes, I know that's a different name. It's actually for one of my other patterns, but it has the same pieces. So it has the slide, the D-rings, and the swivels. That is available in 6 different colors on the website if you need that. If you've been making bags for any time, you might have a stash just like the rest of us. So because I'm also going to add magnets, I have my magnets right here, and these are magnetic snaps that also have rivets on them. And the reason for the rivets is so that you can leave them exposed. Let's say you had it on a wallet or a keychain or something like that where you would see the back. This kind of makes it neat. Now today, we're not going to see the back, but this is what I had close by, and I really like these snaps, so I'm going to go ahead and use those. It doesn't matter that I'm going to cover up the rivet part. The rivet is it's kind of like an extra little bonus. If you have other types of magnetic snaps, they will definitely work. That is not an issue. I just happen to have these. Because I'm using these snaps, these are the 14 millimeter available from camsnap.com. I'm also using my little handheld press. I have my dies in here already, and I have the other die set aside. And since I'm going to put in that type of snap, I also need a hole punch, and I grabbed here my little OESD hole punch. This one just works by pushing down. I have many hole punches, and I thought I would use this one today. It's kind of fun. And the last thing we're going to talk about before we get into our fabric selections is the zipper. So again, this is a number 5 zipper. That just has to do with how wide the teeth are. You can use a number 3 as well. That is completely fine, whichever works for you. You're just going to want something that is plastic or nylon, as this one is, so that you can cut it and sew over it. The technique that we're going to use is going to leave you with kind of these little dips in the corner. I want you to see that now so you know that you did not do anything incorrect. It's the excuse me, it's the technique that we're using. This is a beginner friendly, I call it a sandwich technique. If you have been making bags and you want to change this up and use a different zipper install, absolutely, by all means, you can do that. If you're new to bag making, this is probably the simplest way to put in a zipper, but the one downfall is that you get these little dips. Because of this, that's why we also need something we can sew over. This zipper right here, the pull is metal and the teeth look like they're metal, but they're actually nylon. So now that we have all of our supplies, let's talk about the sewing machine. I'm going to be using my Janome Skyline S9. That is a domestic. That's what I did my embroidery on. And I'm going to be using my G foot, which is my stitch in the ditch foot. That's how I do 1/8 inch top stitching. And I'm going to use my O foot, which is my 1/4 inch foot. I've chosen a 40 weight Orifil cotton thread. You can use whatever you prefer. Polyester is fine as well. And I'm also going to use my favorite 9014 Microtex needle. I think this is a great bag making needle, whether you're using cork or cotton. So let me just slide everything kind of over, and let's take a look at the fabric requirements that we're going to need, and then we'll go ahead and do some cutting. So for the outside of my bag today, I'm going to be using this cork. This has little acorns and leaves on it. I do not need to interface the cork, so I'm gonna just go right to cutting. I don't need to put any interfacing on here. If you're using cotton for the outside, you will need a fat quarter of cotton. One thing that I would highly recommend is that you don't use something directional. And let me show you. I grabbed this one just to kind of show you what I mean. This pattern right here has a very clear direction. All the little bumps are kind of going in one way. Now, I could easily use it this way as well. The clamshells can go in either direction. But when I put this into the bag and it's folded over, is this going to bother me? I will end up having these in one direction, kind of pointing up, and this pointing down. Now with a print like this, maybe it's not as bothersome and I could get away with it. But if I had something that had, let's say, trees or horses or something that has a clear top and bottom, you're going to end up with something upside down. So I would just make sure that whatever you choose, you are fine with this way as well as this way, because that's how the bag is going to be folded. This is not one of those bags that's really friendly for directional fabrics. So again, I'm using this cork. This is an 18 by 27, so roughly the size of a fat quarter, a little bit bigger. This is going to be for my outside as well as my handle. If you're using cotton, you're going to want a fat quarter plus a fat quarter of interfacing. So you'll want to interface that piece before you do your cutting. And it's going to be, you're going to want to use a fusible interfacing. That's my preference. I like Decor Bond 809 or Decoville Light 525. Those are both Pellon products. Very easy to find in all of your box stores. So I am not using cotton outside, so I'm just going to stick with just my cork, no interfacing. I've also chosen for my lining some waterproof canvas. Even though this is on the heavier side, this project is still domestic friendly, which is why I love it. I do try to gear my patterns towards domestic machines. Because this has kind of this rubbery backing, you definitely don't want to put an iron back here, and it doesn't require interfacing, which I think is awesome. It means that I can get this entire bag cut and ready to sew in just a few minutes, and I don't have to even turn my iron on. So I've already got these pieces cut. We'll talk about sizes in just a second. But if you are using cotton for your lining, you're also going to want to get to interface those. And again, just a fat quarter of cotton is fine and a fat quarter of interfacing. Now for the handle, I'm going to be doing a cork handle, just like I did here. And because this is a 1/2 inch finished, my pieces are going to be 1 inch wide. I'm just folding them in half. If you are making this from cotton, you would be folding it 4 times. So you would want to multiply this by 4, which is going to be 2 inches. You will see in the cutting when we get there, I'm going to be cutting 1 inch strips from my cork. If you're using cotton, you're going to want to cut them 2 inches wide. And I would suggest putting a little bit of interfacing, at least in the middle, because cotton can still stretch. If you're using a heavier canvas, you can probably get away without interfacing. Again, it's a slim handle and it's not a giant bag that's going to be holding so much weight, but I still like to interface it. I always like to interface my cotton. Other than that, I think we're about ready to go. So let's go right ahead and get into our cutting. I'm gonna grab my ruler and my rotary cutter and we're gonna cut our pieces. So I'm gonna go ahead and do my cutting for you so you can see how I like to cut my cork. And also if I was using a fat quarter of interfaced fabric, I would do the same thing. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to trim this to 14 inches. This is 27 wide by 18 high. So I'm actually just gonna fold it in half. It's a little bit easier to get it onto my mat. So I'm lining up my ruler right down here on the fold, and I'm just gonna trim up my edge right here, just so I can start with a nice clean edge. And I'm going to trim a 14-inch strip. Because I'm using cork, I'm also going to be cutting my handle from the same piece. If you're using cotton, you will need some extra fabric for your handle, about 1/8 yard. So that's going to be trimmed down from my handle. Now I have my 14-inch high piece, and I'm going to cut 2 9x14 pieces. So I'm just gonna make sure I have a nice square edge here. All right. And this is keeping my print going in the right direction. This is not a directional print that's going to make a huge difference like we talked about before, but it does go this way, and this also makes the best use of my cork. So now that I have that trimmed and it's all square, I'm gonna cut 2 9-inch pieces, and I like to just go right over here to 18, cut, and slide my ruler back. I always like to cut a little bigger, or cut the larger measurement and then kind of work my way back. And there we go. That is all that I need for the outside, 2 9-inch wide by 14-inch high pieces. So I'm going to slide those over, and I'm gonna take this last strip here, and in order to do my adjustable handle, I'm gonna cut 2 strips. It's folded in half, but this is the 27-inch width. So because I am making 1/2 inch wide handle, I'm going to cut 2 1-inch strips. So again, I'm just going to cut a 2-inch strip and then trim that down. There's my leftovers. And trim this to 1 inch. Now, if you've spent any time on my channel, you know that I love a triple fold, a tri-fold handle. So I do have enough cork if I wanted to cut these wider. And in order to do that, these would need to be 1.5 inches. For today, I'm gonna keep it real simple and just cut it into 2 1-inch pieces and just make them a double fold. From this, I will end up getting my tabs as well once I top stitch. I like to sew them together and top stitch, and that's how I'm gonna handle that first. So there are my handle strips. In the next screen, I'm going to have all the sizes that you need to have cut, and I'll also mark if they need interfacing for cotton. So I'll do a cork screen and a cotton screen. There's my 2 pieces. I already cut my lining. I was cutting them from some scraps. So for my lining, I have 2 9-inch wide by 14-inch high pieces. I'm using waterproof canvas. I have cork for the outside, 2 9x14s again. And for my handle from cork, I have 2 approximately 27-inch by 1-inch strips. And that's all I need for the entire bag. So now that that's ready, I'm gonna get my scraps out of the way, and definitely hang on to this. You can make a wallet or something to match for sure. You could even add a pocket if you wanted to. What I'm going to do first is prep my handle. And the way that I like to sew my handle is kind of like if I was making quilt binding. So I'm going to lay one of my pieces right side up. I'm going to place my second piece right side together, just like this. I'm gonna grab a clip and I'm gonna put those right here, line up those edges, okay? And grab my pen, grab my ruler. Of course, I put the clip in the wrong spot. There we go. And I'm going to draw a 45-degree line. So I'm basically drawing from this corner to this corner. Get that in place, just like that. And that is going to be my sewing line. I always double check, make sure I drew it in the right direction. So when I sew, it's gonna open like this. Perfect, okay. I just always get a little bit nervous that I drew it the wrong way. So I'm going to stitch on here, right on that line, make sure I backstitch, and I'll trim my seam allowance to about 1/4 inch and press that open. I'll come back over and we'll talk about top stitching. I stitched my 2 handle pieces at a 45-degree angle. I went ahead and trimmed to about 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then I pressed that open. So now to finish the handle, I need to do some top stitching. You can use clips or you can even use tape if you would prefer, whichever you find easier. And what I'm gonna do is just fold my handle in half. This is just how I like to do it. And add some clips. And at the machine, I will top stitch 1/8 inch from the raw edges as well as the folded. Now, if you're not a fan of this and you don't want to have this raw edge here, just keep in mind cork doesn't fray, so it's not a problem. But if you just don't like the look, you can use your ruler and draw a line down the center, and then you can fold each of your edges inward and you can top stitch how you would like. I just don't prefer that, especially with a smaller handle like this. I find it can be a little bit awkward. So I'm just gonna fold it in half. I think that's totally fine. If you are using cotton fabric, obviously we don't wanna leave any raw edges because they would fray. So for cotton, what you're going to do is fold your piece completely in half, interfacing sides together. You're gonna fold each of your edges in towards that center, and then you'll fold one more time. It will hide all of the raw edges and still be ready for top stitching. So I'm gonna finish clipping here, head over to the machine. I'm gonna top stitch 1/8 inch from each of these long edges, and then we will talk about hardware. I did the top stitching on my handle, so I have 1/8 inch from both of the long edges. So here's my nice long strip. This right now measures, let's see, 24, 48, 49, 50, 51, 52, about 53 inches or so. I am going to cut a few inches off of this for the tabs, so just figure it measures roughly 50 inches. I think that's a really good length for a crossbody bag. I am 5'6" and it sits really well on me. So if you are exceptionally tall or really like to wear your bags low, you can go a little bit longer in your handle, but about 50 to maybe 55 inches is totally fine for an adjustable handle. So now that we have this all set, I grabbed my hardware and I'm going to go ahead and show you how to put these pieces on. First thing I'm going to do is trim my little selvage. Cork has a selvage edge just like fabric does, so I'm going to get rid of that. And I'm going to cut off 4 inches, and that's going to be for my tabs, 2 inches for each one. So 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm gonna go ahead and trim that. In the magazine, I believe it says 1.5 inches for each of them, and that's fine as well. I just thought I would give myself a little bit of extra room just because. So I'm gonna cut this into 2 2-inch long pieces. So these are going to be for the D-rings. So you're gonna take one of your D-rings and one of your little tabs, fold that right over like so. You can add a clip if you want to. And at the machine, you're gonna stitch 1/8 inch right down here on these raw edges. And you're gonna stitch as close to your D-ring as you can. That's going to prevent it from turning while your bag is in use. So we'll do the same thing with this one. Those are not going to be added to this piece, so these are ready to stitch. I'll just put them aside. The first thing we're gonna do here, and I'm gonna show you the steps and then I will clip them in place before I go over to my sewing machine. So the first thing you're gonna do is take your slider, and I just kind of hold that little bar in between my fingers. I'm gonna take my handle and go up and over that center bar, just like so. Bring that down, I don't know, maybe about a 1/2 inch or so. This measurement is not super important. So now that I have that in place, I'm gonna head to the machine and do my stitching. So we'll just pretend that I already stitched that. And all I'm gonna do is stitch about 1/8 of an inch from that raw edge. Now that this is sewn in place, I'm gonna take my handle and I fold it in half, making sure it's not twisted. I take one of my swivel hooks. I got some threads I gotta trim here. There we go. I'm gonna take my swivel hook and it's kind of facing out. So that's going to sit just like that. It's gonna stay loose. And then on this end, I'm going to come back up and over the center where I already sewed. And on this end right here, I'll take my second swivel hook, place that right there, whoops, and fold this over again, about a 1/2 inch or so, and I'll stitch right there about 1/8 of an inch. All right, so these are all set. Let's take a look again. I have on this end my swivel hook sewn in place. I just turned my edge, or excuse me, I looped my edge through and I stitched about 1/8 of an inch from here. I didn't bother to stitch closer to the swivel hook. I could, but I don't think it's gonna go anywhere. Right here I have, oops, I have a thread, that's what I have. Let's trim that. I brought my opposite end up and over the center bar of my slide. I stitched that in place. I added this swivel hook on, it stayed loose, and I kept my handle from twisting. Make sure there isn't a twist because that's such a sad thing to find out afterwards. So then I just took that, looped it right back up and over, and sewed my swivel on. So one swivel is not sewn in place, it stays loose. The other one is sewn onto the end. There's my adjustable handle. And I have my 2 little tabs here. I stitched my D-rings as close as I could get them. I just let my foot kind of determine that. And then I stitched down here about 1/8 of an inch. That stitching won't be seen later when we put it into the bag. So this is all set. I'm gonna move that aside for right now. And I'm gonna go ahead and trim with my darts, or trim my darts. New year, not a new me. I still can't speak on camera. So I'm gonna go ahead and mark the 2 bottom corners from all 4 of these pieces. You can mark on the front or the back, it does not matter. And I'm just lining up the straight edges over here. And I'm making this kind of curved part right here. I'm trying to mark so it's dark enough for you to see. Hopefully you can. There we go. So I'm just making a curve and then I have that little V right there. I'm gonna do the same thing over here. So I'm marking on one of the shorter edges and this would be the bottom. Since we don't have a directional print, it really doesn't matter. So now that I have that done, I'm gonna do the rest of these. I'm gonna mark those as well. And then I'm just gonna take my scissors. And the reason it doesn't matter if you mark on the front or the back is because we're cutting right on those lines. But if for some reason there's a little bit still showing, it's going to be in the seam allowance. We're gonna have a 1/4 inch seam allowance kind of covering all of that, so don't worry too much. So I trimmed the darts from the bottom edges of my 2 outsides and my 2 linings. So this is how each of them looks. It just has a little bit of a curve and then the V cut out. I don't need my linings right now, so I'm gonna set those aside. And I'm also gonna set aside one of my outsides. The next thing we're going to do is mark and add our tabs as well as our magnetic snaps. If you are not adding magnetic snaps, you can fast forward a little bit. You won't need to do this. But if you want to add them, I'm going to show you where your measurements are. Keep in mind, if you have embroidered anything or you have what you want to kind of be this front piece right here, we're actually going to be working on the opposite piece. So this is my plain piece. That one right here, that is my embroidered one. So everything we're going to do with the magnets will be on what will become the front, but it is the piece that doesn't have anything decorative if you've added that. So I'll keep this here so we can kind of take a look at that. So the first thing I'm going to do is mark down 4 inches for my little tabs. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. 1, 2, 3, 4. And you don't really have to mark. You can actually just use your clips to hold it in place. But because I'm going to be kind of moving this around, I might drop one. So there's my mark. I'm making it dark enough that I can see it. And this is a heat erasable pen, so I can always get rid of that later. So if that is my 4-inch mark, I'm gonna place my little tab just below it. So it's actually at the top of the tab. I'm gonna add a clip right there. And my raw edge is towards the outside. My D-ring is facing inward. I'm gonna do the same thing over here. So I'll put the top of the tab right at that little mark, just like so. Get my clip in there. Okay, so those are ready to go. So in order to add this style of magnetic snap, I'm going to need to punch a hole. So I will need to mark for my holes. If you're using a different type of snap, one that has just a washer on the back, you can use the same process. You're just going to be cutting slits and marking with your washer. For me, I'm just going to be cutting a hole for the center. So I have a couple of little scraps of cork here. These are just little, I didn't even really measure them, maybe 1 inch square. These are a little bit bigger, but this is just to reinforce the snap. I would also suggest doing this even if you are doing the other kind of magnetic snap. It's just gonna help to give it a little something extra to grab onto. So I'm gonna use my pen and I'm gonna use my ruler. From the top edge, so I'm working on the opposite end of my darts. I'm gonna mark up here. I'm gonna mark in 1.5 inches and down 1 inch. So we're gonna go 1.5 inches from the left, 1 inch down from the top, and I'm marking right there. That is going to be where I punch my hole. For you and your washer, that will be kind of the center of the washer, and you'll mark on the outside. I'm gonna do the same thing over here. I'm coming down 1 inch and over 1.5 inches. There is something in my way, so I can't do it that way. All right, 1.5 inch, inch down, 1.5 inch in. Okay. I like to triple check my measurements because I'm always afraid I'm making a mistake. So for the next ones, that's going to be for half of our snap. We're going to be marking 1.5 inches in and 8 inches down. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This is my 8, and I'm going to mark in again, 1.5 inches. All right, and I'm just going to do this, make it a little easier on myself. And just want to make sure that my dots line up. Otherwise, my snaps are going to be crooked. Okay, so 1 inch down, 1.5 inches in, 8 inches down, 1.5 inches in. So I'm going to take the male part of my snap. That is the part that has kind of a little bump in the middle. I'm going to put that at the top, and I'm going to use the other half, which is the indented female side. I'm going to use that down here. Doesn't matter. I have no idea, but that's just how I always do it. So I'm going to switch this out first and get this all set up. And what I'm going to do is take my little scrap of cork and put it back here. I'm just kind of roughly eyeballing it. It's not going to be shown later, so it doesn't matter if I get it in the center. And I'm going to put this right on that dot, push down. I'll do the same thing over here. Kind of roughly put that behind my mark. I love this little tool because it actually has different ends here. I'm just using the 2.5 millimeter, but when you need to make a hole, you don't have to worry about where you have to put it because you don't have any restrictions. I can put the hole anywhere that I want. I just love that. I have many hole punches. I've been using this one a lot lately because I really like it. So I'm gonna take my snap here and put that through both pieces. There's my little scrap in the back. Take one of the rivet parts, put that on here. Do the same thing here. And once those are in, I'm gonna set them. And I have to set them this way. The rivet goes towards the top and the snap goes towards the bottom. Just get everything lined up. Give it a squeeze. All right, half done. Now we'll do the same thing down here. Just put this under, punch my hole. And this one. put the other half of my snap through. And now I'm going to leave the top, but take the bottom out. Put the other half in. All right, so that's how that is looking. So what I'm gonna do is head over to the sewing machine. You can see my pieces did move a little tiny bit, which I knew was gonna happen. That's why I made my marks. And I'm just going to stitch within my seam allowance a couple times over each of those to lock them in place. I just stitched roughly about 1/8 of an inch from the edge. Both of my tabs, again, my D-rings are facing in. I just wanted to anchor those in before I do any of my other sewing. So now that I have all my pieces ready, I'm gonna grab my zipper and I'm gonna grab my double stick tape. Now, as far as the pattern in the magazine is concerned, if you have that, it's gonna tell you to do your darts next and then to add your zipper, but I'm just gonna let you know it doesn't matter. You can do either order. We can put our zipper in now, then sew the darts and close it up, or we can sew the darts, add the zipper and close it up. It doesn't matter as long as both things are done before we start doing our final assembly. So for now, I'm just gonna start with my zipper. So the first thing I'm going to do is on one of my outside pieces, and I'm starting with this one, but it does not matter. I'm gonna take some 1/8 inch tape and I'm gonna put it right along this top edge. This is that nice straight top edge. I'm just gonna put that there. Now, if you don't have tape, that is completely fine. You do not have to have tape for this, and I'll show you another option. So if you don't have tape, what you're going to do is after you get your zipper in place, you're just gonna stitch it at the machine. So you'll just have a little bit of extra stitching, not a big deal. So I take my paper off and I'm gonna take my zipper and place my zipper right side down. And it is okay if your zipper hangs off the edge, that's totally fine. If your zipper is in the middle, it depends on what foot you're using. I'm gonna let mine hang off the edge just because I don't think people believe me when I say that all the time. They always think there's gonna be an issue, and there's not. You can let it just kind of hang over the side. So I placed my zipper right side down. If I didn't have tape, I would go to my machine and I would baste this. And the reason is I wanna keep my zipper as straight as possible. If I don't tape it or sew it down, there's a good chance my zipper might shift on me. So now that that is basted in some way, I'm gonna grab one of my lining pieces and put it right side down. Because I'm using waterproof canvas, I'm using the kind of more fabricy side, right sides together with the cork, the rubbery side towards me. If you have cotton, you would be looking at your interfacing. And I'm just gonna add a couple of clips here just to keep everything straight. I have all of my edges lined up here, my sides lined up here. There's my view from the top. And now I'm going to stitch 1/4 inch all the way across here, making sure that I backstitch. Seam number 1 is all stitched. So I sewed 1/4 inch all the way across here. Now I'm gonna open this up so I can see the other half of my zipper. And I'm going to repeat this process with these two pieces. So again, I'm gonna place my tape on my outside top here. So I've got my tape on here. I'm gonna take my paper off and I'm gonna place my other half of my zipper. Now I haven't top stitched anything, so this is of course kind of rolling up a little bit. I'm just gonna clip it so it's a little flatter and easier to work with. I'm gonna place this cork to cork, so right sides together. And now I'm going to take my lining piece and again, right sides down. So linings are right sides together. The back or the interfaced part is facing towards you. I'm gonna add some clips here. I'm gonna again sew 1/4 inch all the way across, making sure that I backstitch. All right, so now that this is all sewn in, before we do our darts, let's talk about top stitching. Because when it comes to top stitching on this kind of zipper technique, the less you do it, the more narrow top stitching, the better. As we discussed in the beginning, your zipper is gonna have this little bit of a dip, kind of this angle to it. The more that you top stitch, the further in, the worse that's going to get. So you'll see here, I did 1/8 inch. I would not recommend doing anything more than 1/8. So don't do 1/4, don't go too wide. Just kind of go really tight right against here. I'm going to stitch 1/8 of an inch on either side for my top stitching. While I'm at the machine, I'm also going to close up my darts. So let's take a look at those. We have 4 on this side and 4 on this side. You have 8 total. And what you're going to do is you're going to be folding your fabric or your cork right sides together like this, because we're going to be folding on those lines of that V. And then once you have this together, you're going to sew 1/4 of an inch, but remember, your 1/4 of an inch is going to be here. So it's actually going to extend past where the dart is. Here's where my cut stops, but my 1/4 inch seam is going to go further than that. So I'm going to do all 8 darts. Again, I'm just folding these together so that I can have a little bit of depth to my bag. Add a clip right there. And I'm going to be stitching 1/4 of an inch. Do that on all 8 of your darts. So let's go ahead and take a look at our stitching before we close everything up. I top stitched 1/8 of an inch from either side of my zipper. I'm not sure if you'll be able to see that, but let me flip that over. So there it is from the lining side. What I wanted to make sure of was that my lining was not rolling into the zipper. I want to make sure my pull will work with no issues. So I've got that top stitched. And then I went ahead and I stitched all of my darts. So you can see now the bottom of the bag kind of has this rounded kind of a shape to it. So I did the 4 on the outside and the 4 on the lining. Now that that's all ready, I'm going to grab my clips. I'm going to be using a lot of them. And I'm going to go ahead and close this all up. My magnets are in place. My D-rings are in place. Make sure, just double check that you're ready to go. And if you are, let's go ahead and close this up. So the first thing we're going to do is move the zipper pull into the middle of the bag. That's why it's okay to sew with it hanging off the edge as long as it's inside now. And over here where your zipper has kind of opened up, if that's hard for you to work with, you can go ahead and stitch a little bit right here just to close that. What I'm going to do now is take my 2 outsides, pull them right sides together, and my 2 linings right sides together. So I have both of those ready to go. The first thing I always like to clip is my zipper, and then my darts, and then everything else should fall into place. So first thing I'm going to do is take my zipper and I'm going to push the teeth. Let me get rid of some of these little threads here. I'm going to push the zipper teeth towards the lining. Now, obviously we can't sew if the zipper is like this. So the teeth kind of have to turn a little bit. That's also why you get that little dip in your bag. Nothing to worry about. As long as the zipper functions, that's really all that we care about. So I'm just getting those seams together and I'm pushing the zipper teeth. They're over here towards the lining. And I'm kind of just keeping them in the same direction. So again, I'm pushing those towards the lining, trying to line up my seam here. And I'll add a clip. Next, I'm going to come down to my darts. Take my 2 darts here and I'm going to nest them. I want one going in one direction and one going in the other. So the bottom one's going to the left, top one's going towards the right. Add a clip. Do the same thing over here. Just kind of push those together. That's going to make them line up really nicely. Now I'm going to do the outside. Darts are not totally perfect. If they're not cut perfectly, it's okay. We have some wiggle room. And now that I have those clipped, I'm just going to keep going around. So let's take a look here. My zipper ends are kind of hanging off. I will trim those later. My zipper teeth are going together towards the lining. My darts are nested. I've clipped all the way around. So when I take this to the machine, I'm going to sew 1/4 of an inch seam, and I'm going to start down here. I'm going to start about right here, probably an inch-ish from my dart. And I'm going to stitch all the way around. When I get to my zippers, I'm going to take my time. I'm going to keep coming down here and I'm going to stop again about an inch past the dart. I'm going to leave a nice size opening that I can get my hand into so I can completely turn this bag when it's done. Just going to trim up a couple of extra little threads here. Now that I am all sewn, I'm also going to trim off the end of my zipper. I don't need all that hanging out inside the bag. So I stitched all the way around, except I left an opening in the lining. And now we can turn this right side out. This is not a hard one to turn because there's not a lot of stuff going on. Some bags, a little bit more difficult. All right, double check, make sure everything looks good before I close up the lining. Everything is lined up. Oh, my zipper looks real good. All right, how's this side look? That was a pleasant surprise. How about you? You don't look so bad. All right, everything looks good. Tabs are in, tabs are out actually, which is good. All right, so the last thing we're gonna do is just close up the lining. There's no top stitching because we already did that. So you're just gonna take your raw edges and tuck them under like so. Add a couple of clips here. I'm gonna stitch this real quick, about 1/8 of an inch. So that's all tucked in. Zip this up. There it is. And then I'm gonna fold this over, and I will take this to the iron and give it a press. And if you have a pressing clapper, you can kind of just set that on here and let it cool for a couple minutes, and it will start to make that crease more permanent. I'm gonna add my handle. All right. A nice, simple bag in an afternoon, ready to use. Oh, I just love it. It's so cute with the acorns. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you do and you like videos like this, don't forget to click subscribe, hit the notification bell, and give it a thumbs up. Thanks for watching.